When my father passed away, I thought the pain of losing him would be the hardest thing I'd ever face. But I was wrong. The real pain came not from his death itself, but from the betrayal that followed, from my own flesh and blood, my older brother. You see, my father was not just a man, he was a builder. He built a family from nothing, he built a business from the ground up, and he built a name in our small town that people respected. Everyone knew Dad. He was the man who'd help fix a neighbor's roof after a storm, who'd cover someone's grocery bill if they fell short, who'd sit quietly with a veteran on Memorial Day just to listen to his stories. He wasn't wealthy when he was young, but through decades of hard work, he created something meaningful. A small construction company, a modest home, and most importantly, a legacy of honesty and loyalty. But the thing about legacies is this: they don't always pass smoothly from one generation to the next. Sometimes they get corrupted. Sometimes greed sneaks in. And in my case, that greed wore the face of my own brother. Growing up, I always knew my brother James was Dad's favorite. Or at least it felt that way. James was the firstborn, the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. If he brought home a C on a test, Dad would pat him on the back and say, "Well, at least you tried, son." But if I, the younger one, brought home a B, Dad would look at me and say, "Why not an A? You can do better." It stung sometimes, but I never held it against Dad. I knew he loved me, too. He just expected more. Maybe he saw me as the one who had to work harder to prove myself. And I did. I worked quietly in the background, helping Dad with the business when James was off chasing girls or playing ball with his friends. I learned how to keep the books, how to manage clients, and how to keep the machines running when they broke down. James was the flashy one, but I was the one who kept things together. Still, in our house, appearances mattered, and James always looked the part. He was tall, charming, and knew how to make people laugh. Dad loved introducing him at church, saying, "This is my oldest, James. He's gonna take over the business one day." And I'd smile and nod, even though I was the one covered in grease, making sure the trucks actually started every morning. When Dad got sick, things started to change. It wasn't sudden, but gradual, little signs at first. He'd forget where he left his tools, or he'd repeat the same story twice in one evening. At first, we laughed it off. But then came the doctor visits. The quiet conversations between Mom and Dad at night, the hushed tones, the medications lined up neatly on the counter. By the time we realized how serious it was, the man I had always known as strong and unshakable had grown frail. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of death, but fear of what would happen to everything he'd built. One night, when James wasn't around, Dad called me into his room. He was lying in bed, thin and pale, but his voice was still steady. He said, "Son, promise me something. Promise me you'll take care of your brother." I was stunned. Me? Take care of James? He's older than me. Dad smiled weakly. Older? Yes. Wiser? Not so much. He means well, but he's careless. Someone needs to keep him grounded. And that someone is you. I nodded, swallowing hard. I promised, Dad. It was a heavy promise, but I meant it. When Dad passed, the house felt emptier than ever before. The walls seemed to echo with silence, the kind of silence that follows after years of laughter and noise. Mom cried for days, and I stayed close to her, helping with arrangements, making sure she ate, making sure she wasn't alone. James, on the other hand, played his role at the funeral, shaking hands, giving speeches, and even shedding a few tears for the crowd. But behind closed doors, he was different. Cold, calculating. The very night after the funeral, I overheard him talking on the phone. He was pacing in the kitchen, whispering sharply, "Yeah, it's all mine now. The house, the business, everything. My brother, he won't fight me on it. He never does." My chest tightened as I leaned against the wall, listening. He spoke with such confidence, such arrogance, that for a moment I wondered if he knew something I didn't. The next morning, my fears were confirmed. James walked into the living room with a smug grin and a stack of papers in his hand. "Looks like Dad left everything to me," he said casually, as if he were announcing the weather. I blinked. "What do you mean, everything?" He spread the papers on the table. Copies of old documents, bank statements, business deeds. "The house, the company, even Dad's life savings. It's all mine. You can keep Dad's old toolbox if you want. Sentimental stuff, you know?" I felt my blood boil. "James, that's not how this works. We haven't even read the will yet." He smirked, leaning back in the chair. "We don't need to. I already know what it says. Dad trusted me. He always did. You were just the backup." His words cut deeper than he realized. Maybe deeper than he even intended. Days turned into weeks, and James acted as though he were the new king of the family. He moved into Dad's office at the company, drove Dad's truck as if it were his own, and started making decisions without consulting anyone. Clients noticed the difference. Some were polite, but others told me directly, "Your dad would never have done things this way." Mom tried to stay neutral, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. She knew what James was doing wasn't right, but she didn't want to cause a war between her sons. Still, now and then, when James left the room, she'd touch my arm and whisper, "Don't let him ruin everything your father worked for." And I promised her I wouldn't. But James didn't stop there. He grew bolder with every passing day. He went through Dad's belongings, tossing aside family heirlooms as if they were trash. He sold off equipment from the business, pocketing the money without explanation. He even hinted at selling the house. The very home where we'd grown up, where Dad had fixed the floors with his own hands, where Mom still lived. One evening, I confronted him. "James, you can't just take everything. This isn't what Dad wanted." He laughed, a bitter, mocking laugh. "Dad wanted me to lead. He always said I'd take over one day. Face it, you were never part of the plan. You were just background noise." I clenched my fists, but I held back. I remembered my promise to Dad: take care of James. But how do you take care of someone who treats you like dirt? Still, a small voice inside me kept saying, "Wait for the will reading. The truth will come out." And so I waited. I endured the arrogance, the humiliation, the pain of watching my father's legacy get tarnished. Because deep down, I believed my father was smarter than this. He wasn't careless. He wouldn't leave everything in the hands of someone like James without thinking it through. And soon enough, I would find out I was right. I thought losing Dad was the worst thing that could happen. But watching James twist his memory day after day became its own kind of torture. Every corner of our lives turned into a reminder of how power corrupts when it falls into the wrong hands. James strutted through the house like he owned not just the walls but the people in it. He started changing things. Furniture that had been in our family for decades. Gone. Dad's old recliner? The one he used to fall asleep in while watching Sunday football? James dragged it out to the curb like it was trash. I remember standing there, staring at it under the streetlight that night, fighting the urge to drag it back inside. That chair wasn't just a chair. It was where Dad held me when I was a boy, where he told me stories about his own childhood. And now it sat outside, waiting for the garbage truck. Mom cried quietly when she saw it was gone. James noticed but didn't care. He said, "It's just junk, Mom. Time to modernize." That was James. Everything sentimental, everything rooted in family history meant nothing to him. What mattered was what he could show off to others. The business was next. Dad's company wasn't huge, but it was respected. Every deal Dad made, every handshake, meant something. Customers trusted him. He believed that if you promised to finish a job by Friday, you did it, even if it meant working all night. James didn't see it that way. He cut corners, overcharged customers, and let quality slide. I remember one longtime client, Mr. Peterson, storming into the office after James botched a repair job on his barn roof. "Your father would be ashamed," he said, pointing a finger right in James's face. James brushed him off with a smirk. "Times change, old man. If you don't like it, go somewhere else." Mr. Peterson turned to me then, his face red with anger but also sadness. "Your dad raised you better than this. Don't let him ruin what was built." I wanted to say something, but James stepped in front of me, shutting me down with a glare that said, "Stay out of this." And I did, though every fiber in me burned with anger. Money became James's obsession. He sold off equipment Dad had carefully maintained for years. He liquidated tools, vehicles, even the land Dad had bought as an investment. One by one, the pillars of Dad's hard work vanished, turned into cash that James spent recklessly. I once walked into his room and found shopping bags piled on the floor, expensive clothes, watches, even a brand new gaming system. He was living large off money that didn't belong to him, while Mom and I scraped by to keep up with bills. When I confronted him, he laughed in my face. "Relax, little brother. There's plenty more where that came from. Besides, it's my money now. Dad left it to me." The way he said it made my stomach turn. He wasn't just greedy. He was proud of it. Mom grew quieter as weeks passed. She tried to hide her tears, but I could see them. At night, when James was out partying, I'd hear her crying softly in her room. One evening, I knocked and stepped inside. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, holding one of Dad's old shirts to her chest like it was a lifeline. "I don't know what happened to James," she whispered. "He wasn't always like this." I sat beside her. "Dad trusted him too much. He thinks everything belongs to him now." Mom shook her head. "Your father was careful. He thought ahead. I hope when the will is read, things will be made right." Her words stuck with me. I clung to them like a rope in stormy waters. Because every day felt like drowning. The humiliation wasn't just private. James made sure to embarrass me publicly too. One afternoon, while I was working in the garage fixing an old truck, he swaggered in with a couple of his friends. "Look at him," James said, pointing at me with a smirk. "Still playing mechanic, like Dad's little errand boy." His friends chuckled and James grabbed a beer from the fridge. "Face it, bro. You're nothing without me." Dad knew that. That's why he gave everything to me. "You're just background noise." The words echoed in my head long after he left. Background noise. That's all I was to him. And maybe to Dad too, if James was telling the truth. But deep down, I didn't believe it. Dad may have favored James, but he wasn't a fool. He knew who did the work. He knew who kept things running. And I had to trust that when the time came, the truth would surface. The days dragged on. Each one chipped away at my patience. James threw parties in Dad's house, blasting music until the walls shook. Strangers wandered through the living room, spilling drinks on the carpet Mom had chosen with such care years ago. When I protested, James snapped, "Lighten up, Dad's gone. It's my house now. You don't like it? Leave." But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Mom needed me, and some part of me needed to hold on, to protect what little of Dad's legacy remained. One night, after another shouting match with James, I went into Dad's old study. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and old books. His desk was still there, though James had rifled through most of the drawers. I sat down and ran my fingers over the worn wood, wishing I could hear Dad's voice one more time. That's when I noticed something. A faint outline in the back of the bottom drawer, like a hidden compartment. My heart skipped. I tugged at it, but it wouldn't budge. Before I could try again, I heard James's footsteps coming down the hall, and I quickly pushed the drawer shut. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced. Did Dad leave something behind? Something James hadn't found. James's arrogance grew unbearable. He bragged to anyone who would listen. At dinner one evening, with Mom sitting silently at the table, he raised his glass and said, "Here's to Dad's legacy and to me, the rightful heir." I couldn't hold back. "You talk like you earned it. But you didn't. You took shortcuts your whole life. Dad carried you." His eyes narrowed. "Careful, little brother. Don't forget who holds the power now." The tension at the table was suffocating. Mom finally stood up, tears in her eyes, and walked away without saying a word. The weeks blurred together, each one heavier than the last. Every time James flaunted his so-called inheritance, every time he diminished me in front of others, the anger in me grew. But so did the determination, because I knew the day of the will reading was coming, and with it, the truth. James acted like he had already won. He strutted, he laughed, he mocked, but deep down, a voice inside me whispered he's wrong. Dad wouldn't leave it this way. Dad left something behind. And when it comes out, James will fall. I held on to that thought like a lifeline, waiting, counting down the days. And as the will reading approached, the air in the house grew tense, electric, like the charged sky before a thunderstorm. Because I knew something big was coming. The day of the will reading came sooner than I expected and slower than I could bear. Morning light slid across the kitchen table as Mom stirred a spoon through cold coffee she wasn't drinking. James hummed in the hallway like he was getting ready for a party instead of our father's final words. He wore a navy blazer he never earned, the kind of jacket Dad would have saved for Easter Sunday. He winked at me as we headed for the door. "Big day, little brother," he said. "Try to keep up." The lawyer's office sat above the old hardware store on Main, the same place Dad signed contracts and shook hands for 30 years. The steps creaked under our shoes. The banister felt smooth from decades of palms. Inside, the waiting room still smelled like lemon polish and paper. Certificates hung in neat rows. There was a photograph of the lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, standing beside Dad after the company expanded to a second truck. Dad's smile back then could have powered the town. Caldwell opened his door, thin and careful, like every movement had to be right. "I'm sorry for your loss, Margaret," he told Mom first. He always talked to her with the kind of respect that made your spine straighten. Then he nodded at us. "James. And you, Tyler, come in." We took our seats around a heavy oak table that looked older than all of us combined. Files sat stacked like bricks. A glass bowl of peppermint candies glinted in the soft light from the window. James reached for a candy and unwrapped it loudly, like the sound of paper was a victory drum. Caldwell cleared his throat and folded his hands. "Your father prepared a will some years ago," he said. "He updated it twice." He glanced at me, then at James. He was, how shall I say, meticulous. James smiled as if meticulous meant, favored me. Caldwell opened a leather folder and began. It started the way a lot of wills do. A few small bequests, a mention of church charities, instructions about the cemetery plot. I watched Mom's hands clasp in her lap. When Caldwell said Dad's choice of pallbearers, her knuckles whitened. because he'd named the men who had already carried him. It was as if Dad were still arranging chairs after he left the room. Then came the business. To my sons James and Tyler, Caldwell Reed. The words landed like stones dropped into a quiet pond. I leave the operation and assets of Hayes Construction as follows. James leaned forward, peppermint on his breath. I held my own. James will serve as acting manager for a period of 6 months following my death. During this time, Tyler will oversee accounts, procurement, and maintenance. Decisions of expansion or liquidation are not permitted without joint written consent. James blinked, smile dimming a notch. Acting. Caldwell didn't look up. Acting. He continued. At the end of 6 months, ownership will transfer in accordance with clauses listed in Addendum C, sealed and to be revealed upon completion of the 6 months. James sank back. Addendum C, what is this, a game show? Mom's eyes flicked to me. I felt something like hope rise, small, nervous but there. Caldwell turned a page. Concerning the family home. The house is mine. James cut in, casual and cruel. We can skip that part. Caldwell raised a brow. James, your father asked for this to be read in full. He returned to the page. Concerning the family home, Margaret retains full life estate. No sale mortgage or transfer of ownership can occur during her lifetime without her signed consent and the signature of the assigned caretaker. Assigned caretaker. James said, annoyed. Caldwell's finger tracked each line. Yes. The caretaker of your mother, chosen by her, shall be granted joint authority to protect her interests and comfort. If either son refuses this duty, the other shall assume it. Mom breathed out, a sound like a bird freed. James coughed a laugh. I mean, of course I'll take care of Mom, he said, looking everywhere but at her. Caldwell closed the first folder. There are, as you heard, sealed addenda. He gestured to an envelope with a red wax seal, Dad's initials pressed into it. They are to be opened at specific times. Your father liked its structure. He, too, looked at the photograph on the wall, the one with Dad's wide, honest grin. We will reconvene in 6 months to read Addendum C regarding final ownership of the company. James pushed back his chair a little. So we came here to hear not yet. That's it. Caldwell tilted his head. There is more. He reached for a thinner packet labeled Addendum A. This is to be read today. He broke a smaller seal and slid out 3 crisp pages. The top page clung stubbornly to the second, like static held them together. Caldwell ran his thumb along the edge and frowned. James rolled his eyes. God, just read it. Caldwell freed the page carefully. Addendum AZ, letters of character and instruction. He cleared his throat and began again, voice steady. To my boys. If you are hearing this, it means I'm not there to say it. I write these words in love, not anger. Something in the room shifted, the air turned heavier, more intimate, like Dad had just walked in and shut the door behind him. James. Caldwell Reed, you have charm I never had. People like you the moment you arrive. That's a gift, son. But charm without backbone turns into a mask. You can con a stranger, you cannot con a ledger. Or a mother. This is why I set a trial, not to punish you. To give you a chance to grow into the man you already think you are. James's jaw twitched. He glanced at me as if daring me to smile. I didn't, Tyler. Caldwell continued. You carry the load when no one sees. You're quiet and that makes people underestimate you. But the work knows. The engines know. The receipts know. When times get loud, stay faithful to the quiet things. I am more like you than I ever sug. My eyes stung. Mom's hand found mine under the table, warm and steady. Caldwell turned the page. The paper stuck again, almost fused, as if humidity or time had pressed it to its neighbor. He eased the corner up, careful not to tear it. That was when I noticed a small, faded pencil mark along the margin of the second sheet. A mark Dad used when he wanted to remember where something important lived. Sorry? Caldwell murmured. He lifted the page free and frowned deeper, reading something we couldn't yet see. Then he looked up. This is unusual. He laid the newly freed page flat and began in a measured tone. If either of my sons sells equipment, land, or vehicles belonging to the company during the 6-month trial without joint written consent. He paused, eyes moving across the lines. Or if either son removes items of sentimental value from the home without Margaret's consent, then ownership of the company and any remaining assets will immediately convert to the beneficiary listed in Addendum B. This page must be read aloud in the presence of both sons and Margaret. Silence is not just the absence of sound, it is a presence of its own, thick and undeniable. It filled the room, poured into every corner, and settled like dust. Mom's fingers tightened around mine. James went very still. What is this? He asked, voice low. Caldwell tapped the margin lightly. Your father anticipated disputes. James scoffed too quickly. No one sold anything. He said it like a child says, "I didn't break it," while standing over a pile of shattered glass. Caldwell didn't answer. He reached for another envelope from the stack, Addendum B, sealed in green wax. He held it up so we all could see Dad's initials, pressed deep, then cracked it open with a silver letter opener. "This," he said, "names the contingent beneficiary in the event the conditions are violated." He slid out a single page and read. Beneficiary, Deborah Lane. The name took a heartbeat to make sense. Then Mom covered her mouth. Deborah had worked for Dad for 19 years. She kept the books, scheduled jobs, and brought lemon pound cake to the office on Fridays. When her husband lost his job, Dad kept her on and raised her pay. She was family without sharing our last name. James barked a laugh, but it landed wrong. "That's a joke, right? The bookkeeper." Caldwell shook his head gently. "A beneficiary your father trusted." He turned the page over and showed us a list of dates and initials. Dad's neat check marks next to entries titled Vehicle Maintenance Logs, Equipment Inventory, Hum Heirloom Register. The peppermint turned sour in my mouth. Caldwell slid a small envelope across the table toward Mom. "Margaret, your husband left this for you." He waited until she nodded, then placed it in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the flap. Inside was a key, small brass attached to a tag with a number stamped on it, 317. "Safe deposit box," she whispered. Caldwell nodded. "At the bank across the street. Your husband left instructions. The contents are to be accessed only if the addendum conditions are triggered." James stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "This is ridiculous. He can't do this. I'm the acting manager." "Acting," Caldwell repeated, a single word with the weight of a gavel. James paced the length of the rug, then spun back. "No one sold anything," he said again, louder, eyes flashing. He gestured at me, grasping for control. Tell him nothing was sold. Tell him I didn't speak." The memory of the yard emptied of Dad's equipment washed over me. The for sale posts on James's social media. The quiet cash trades made at midnight with men who didn't leave receipts. The recliner is on the curb under the streetlight. Caldwell didn't look at me, he looked at Mom. "Margaret, were items removed from the home without your consent?" Her voice was so soft I barely heard it. "Yes." James spun to her, incredulous. "It was junk, Mom." Caldwell made a note. "And from the company, I found my voice. 3 generators, 2 compressors, 1 tiller, the old Ford, and the orange skid steer Dad bought from the county auction last spring." "How would you know?" James snapped. "Because I was the one who maintained them," I said. "And because the maintenance log is missing pages." Caldwell reached into his drawer and set a copy of the maintenance log on the table. Some pages were clean. Others had ragged edges torn. He laid a plastic sleeve beside it. Inside, a phone photograph of the log before the tiers, time, stamped, with every page intact. The photo showed Dad's handwriting. "Your father anticipated disputes," he said again, almost kindly. "He made duplicates. He asked Ms. Lane to photograph and file them in my office monthly." James's shoulders sagged a fraction. For a second, I saw the boy he once was. Caught cornered, and angry that the rules applied to him. Caldwell returned to the freed page. Dad's trapdoor. Upon verification of any such sale or removal without consent during the trial period. He read, "Ownership transfers immediately to beneficiary B. The acting manager will surrender keys, accounts, and access within 72 hours. Failure to comply authorizes legal action and injunctive relief." Mom's key glinted in the sunlight on the table. The room breathed with us, slow, stunned. James swallowed. "You said upon verification. You haven't verified anything." Caldwell nodded. "That's true." He opened a final folder and slid out a stack of printed screenshots, receipts, and text message threads. "But I have begun." He placed the papers side by side like tiles. A marketplace listing with our skid steer, clearly photographed in our yard. A cash withdrawal from the business account the same afternoon. A text from James to a buyer, no paperwork. "Bring cash." A selfie of James leaning against the Ford with a caption, "Out with the old." James's face drained of color. Caldwell didn't gloat. He simply gathered the sheets and placed them in a neat pile. "I'll need to complete formal verification with the bank and the buyers." "But Mr. Hayes," he meant James, "I advise you to prepare yourself. The conditions appear to have been triggered." James slammed his fist onto the table, the candy bowl rattling. "This is insane?" Mom flinched. I didn't move. Caldwell was silent for a breath. "Your father's will is the opposite of insane. It is precise." Outside, a truck downshifted on Main Street, the sound low and distant, like thunder beyond the hills. Caldwell waited for the noise to fade. He reached under the table and lifted a small metal box, set it between us, and turned a key of his own. "Your father left a recording," he said softly. He asked that I play it in the event of heightened emotions. He pressed a button. The speaker crackled. Then Dad's voice filled the room. "If you're hearing me," he said, and I closed my eyes because it was him. Tired but unmistakable, the vowels of our town tucked in his words. Then things got loud. "Boys, I love you. Margaret, I love you most. James, when you were 10, you sold your baseball glove to buy your friend a bike tire because he cried. That boy is still in there, I know it. But son, you can't sell what isn't yours. That's not charm. That's theft. Tyler, you were the one who came back after dark to turn off the compressor and save the electric bill. You thought I didn't see. I saw. I saw everything." The speaker clicked softly as the tape whirred. "Here's what matters," Dad's voice said. "A name takes a lifetime to build and 5 minutes to ruin. If you've kept your mother safe, if you've kept the tools in order, if you've kept your word, then the company is yours jointly, and I'll rest easy knowing you did the right thing. If you didn't, then it goes to someone who kept faith when it was hard, Debbie. She knows the books better than anyone. She knows the people. She knows that a contract is a promise and a promise is a kind of prayer." The recording stopped. Caldwell let the quiet settle again before he shut off the box. James spoke first, but his voice had lost its gloss. "You can't just take my life away." Caldwell folded his hands. "Your life is not being taken. Your father's work is being protected." He looked at me. "Tyler, please come by tomorrow morning. We'll discuss temporary arrangements for payroll and vendor communications while we finalize verification. Margaret, I'll escort you to the bank today to open the box." James stared at the freed page as if he could will the words to change. The sun shifted across the table and found a smudge near the bottom where Dad had dragged his thumb. Proof he had touched this paper, thought it through, left it for this moment. Caldwell slid the peppermint bowl toward us. It was an odd human gesture in the middle of legal machinery. No one reached. Mom stood slowly. Her back was straighter than I'd seen it in months. She tucked the key into her purse and looked at James, not with anger, not with gloating, but with the tired truth of a mother who has watched too much. "Your father gave you a chance," she said. "He gave both of you a chance." James opened his mouth, then shut it. He had no words that wouldn't break apart in the air. We left the office into the afternoon light that felt cleaner than the air we'd breathed upstairs. On the street, people moved in their ordinary ways, carrying a bag of feed, pushing a stroller, holding a coffee, and it struck me that the world keeps going even when your life is burning down or being rebuilt. Mom took my arm. For a long moment, we stood, listening to the distant hum of our own. Behind us, through the window, I could still see the oak table and the stack of papers. Somewhere inside those pages, Dad had pressed our futures like leaves. James stepped out after us and paused at the top of the stairs. He looked smaller than he had on the way in. He looked like someone who had finally met the mirror he'd avoided. He started to speak, then didn't. For the first time since the funeral, the swagger slipped. The room had gone silent earlier when Caldwell freed that stuck page. Out here, under the square of September sky, that silence followed us, not empty but full of consequences, of choices made and choices still possible. I didn't say anything to him. Not yet. Some words have to wait for the right hour, and ours wasn't here. We walked to the bank instead, the key warm in Mom's purse, my father's voice still in my chest, steady as an engine that'd been tuned by a careful hand. We walked across the street to the bank, the three of us, Mom clutching her purse like it carried not just a key but the weight of everything Dad had left behind, me steady at her side, and James trailing, his footsteps heavier than I'd ever heard them. Inside, the teller recognized us instantly. News traveled fast in a small town, and everyone knew Dad. Everyone had questions in their eye they didn't dare speak. The teller nodded softly and guided us to a private room where safe deposit boxes lined the walls like silent witnesses. Mom's hands trembled as she slid the brass key into box 317. The lock clicked, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if the whole room inhaled. She drew out a long metal drawer, and inside was a single leather-bound folder, sealed with another one of Dad's wax stamps. She passed it to Caldwell, who had followed us over. He cracked the seal and opened it slowly, carefully, like a priest unveiling scripture. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Each one is addressed in Dad's handwriting. Some to me, some to Mom, even some to James. At the bottom lay a final envelope labeled, in firm strokes, to be read last. Caldwell handed the letters to us. Mom opened hers first, tears running down her cheeks as she read quietly. I opened mine and Dad's words leapt from the page as though he were standing right there. "Tyler, I know you think I favored your brother. Maybe I did at times. Maybe I pushed you harder because I knew you could bear it. But son, strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes strength whispers, keeps going, carries the load no one sees. That's who you are. And I trust you more than you'll ever know. My chest tightened, my throat burning as I clutched the letter. James held his own envelope, unopened, staring at it like it was a riddle he didn't want to solve. His hands shook, but he didn't tear it open. He just stared. For the first time, his arrogance faltered. Then Caldwell lifted the final envelope, cleared his throat, and read aloud. To my family, if you have reached this page, it means my sons did not agree. It means greed or pride got in the way. But I anticipated this moment. I have always believed that a man's true wealth is not in what he keeps but in what he protects. That is why I left instructions, safeguards, and truths locked away until now. He turned the page, his voice low but steady. James, if you are hearing this, it means you've already broken my trust. You've sold what wasn't yours or taken what wasn't given. Son, I gave you 6 months to prove me wrong, and you couldn't last even half that. That's why I placed everything under a condition. Not to punish you, but to save what I built from being destroyed by your carelessness. James flinched like the words were stones hurled at him. His lips parted, but no sound came. Caldwell continued. Tyler, if you are hearing this, it means you kept faith. You honored your mother, you honored the work, you honored me. This family needs a backbone, not a crown, and you have been that backbone all along. My eyes blurred. Mom squeezed my hand and I felt her strength pour into me. Then came the final blow. Therefore, I hereby declare, upon confirmation of violations of the conditions, full ownership of Hayes Construction, the estate, and remaining assets will pass jointly to Tyler Hayes and Deborah Lane, to be managed with honesty and fairness. James, you are not cut out, at least not yet. But redemption is never off the table. Prove yourself in your own life. Build something of your own, and maybe one day you'll understand what legacy truly means. Caldwell folded the letter slowly, letting the silence hang heavy. James's face drained of all color. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his father's words breaking through his pride. For the first time in months, he wasn't smirking, wasn't mocking, wasn't winning. He was just a man, small, shaken, and suddenly aware of the hole he'd dug for himself. Mom looked at him, not with anger, but with sorrow. Your father gave you a chance, James, she whispered, and you threw it away. Tears brimmed in his eyes, though he tried to hide them. He opened his letter at last, and whatever Dad had written there, it cracked something inside him. His hands trembled so badly the paper rattled. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile, because this wasn't victory, it was truth. And truth doesn't need parades. It just needs to stand, steady and unshaken. As we left the bank, the late sun fell across Main Street, painting the world in gold. For the first time since Dad passed, I felt like he was walking with me, not as a shadow of grief, but as a presence of strength. His voice echoed in my mind, a name takes a lifetime to build and 5 minutes to ruin. And I swore in that moment, as Mom walked beside me and James trailed behind in silence, that I would honor that name, not with greed, not with arrogance, but with the kind of quiet strength Dad had always seen in me. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes justice is a whisper. A page stuck to another, waiting for the right hands to turn it. And when it's finally revealed, it speaks louder than anything. That night after the will reading and the safe deposit box, the house felt different. For months, it had carried the weight of James's arrogance, his laughter, his mocking words. But now, there was a silence that wasn't heavy anymore. It was a silence of peace, of justice finally settling into its rightful place. Mom sat at the kitchen table, Dad's letter still open in front of her, a candle burning softly by her side. She kept running her fingers across the paper, as though touching the ink could bring him back. Her eyes were red from tears, but there was relief in them too. Like a burden she had carried alone had finally lifted. James sat in the living room, quiet, staring into the darkness. No television, no phone buzzing with friends calling for another party. Just silence. I passed by him once, and for the first time in years, he didn't look at me with mockery. He didn't look at me at all. His eyes were far away, lost in thoughts only he could hear. I wanted to feel anger. I wanted to remind him of all the things he had done, the equipment he sold, the heirlooms he discarded, the way he humiliated me in front of others. But instead, all I felt was exhaustion. I was too tired for anger, too tired for vengeance. Because the truth was, vengeance had already been delivered. By Dad's words, by that hidden page, by the justice he had carefully planned long before his last breath. Karma had a way of showing up when you least expected it. And for James, it had shown up in the form of his own father's voice, echoing from beyond the grave. In the days that followed, things began to change. The company, once on the edge of collapse under James's recklessness, began to steady itself again. Deborah came by the office, her calm presence smoothing the chaos James had left behind. She knew every account, every client, every unfinished job. She and I worked side by side, long hours, restoring the trust Dad had built over decades. Clients who had stopped calling returned, cautiously at first. They came because of loyalty to Dad's name, but they stayed because they saw that we still honored his way of doing business: honesty first, quality always, promises kept. It wasn't easy. The damage James had done couldn't be undone overnight. But slowly, the wheels began turning again, steady and reliable, like the machines Dad had once taught me to care for. And in all of it, I carried Dad's words with me. Sometimes strength whispers, keeps going, carries the load no one sees. I wasn't flashy. I didn't make speeches. I just worked. Quietly, faithfully, like Dad had trusted me to. As for James, he struggled. The truth is, losing wasn't something he was used to. He had spent his whole life believing the world would bend to his charm. But charm couldn't bend the iron words of a will. It couldn't undo the fact that he had sold what wasn't his, taken what wasn't given. At first, he raged. He slammed doors, shouted into phones, cursed Dad's name, cursed mine, cursed everyone but himself. But eventually, even that fire burned out, and what was left was a man staring into the mirror at the consequences of his own choices. One night, weeks later, I found him sitting on the porch steps, staring at the stars. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "You think Dad hated me?" I sat beside him, the cool night air wrapping around us. "No, he loved you. That's why he gave you a chance." James swallowed hard. And I blew it. I didn't answer. Some truths didn't need confirmation. But I put a hand on his shoulder, because no matter what he had done, he was still my brother. Dad had asked me to take care of him, and maybe this was part of it. Not shielding him from consequences, but being there when those consequences finally sank in. When Mom finally smiled again, really smiled, it was a Sunday morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and she hummed softly as she cooked breakfast. It was the same tune she used to hum when Dad sat at the table, coffee in hand, planning the week. For the first time since he passed, the house felt alive again. Not because James had been humbled, not because I had been lifted, but because Dad's spirit, his values, his voice, his legacy, was still here. Living in the choices we made, in the way we carried ourselves, in the promises we kept. And I realized something then: Dad hadn't just left behind money, or a business, or a house. He had left behind a blueprint for how to live. A reminder that wealth isn't measured in what you own, but in what you protect. In the people you honor. In the truth you stand by. The will reading had been a storm, tearing through our family, exposing every crack and every weakness. But storms don't just destroy, they reveal. They strip away the false layers and show what's really there. For James, it revealed pride and greed. For me, it revealed patience and quiet strength. For Mom, it revealed resilience deeper than any of us had imagined. And for Dad, it revealed the depth of his wisdom, planning, and love. Even in death, he found a way to protect what mattered most. So if you're listening to this story, maybe you've seen something similar in your own life. Maybe you've watched greed tear a family apart. Maybe you've seen siblings fight over inheritance, or promises broken, or love forgotten when money came into the picture. But remember this: money fades. Houses crumble. Businesses rise and fall. What endures is character. What endures is love. What endures is the name you leave behind. Dad once told me, "A name takes a lifetime to build and 5 minutes to ruin." I didn't understand it when I was younger, but now I do, and I carry that truth with me every day. So guard your name. Protect your family. Be the quiet strength that keeps the load steady when no one else will. Because in the end, that's what people remember, not what you owned, but who you were. And to you, listening right now, thank you. Thank you for sharing this journey with me, for walking through the grief, the betrayal, the justice, and the redemption. I hope my father's words reach you the way they reached me. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this: greed may win in the short term, but truth, love, and loyalty always win in the end. Always, so hold on to those things. Because one day when your story is told, you'll want people to say not what you owned, but what you gave. Not what you took, but what you protected. That's legacy. That's power. That's love. Thank you for listening.